Okay, this first session after coffee is a dual act between Neil Carberry from the CBI and Colin Angel from an organisation called UKHCA. And I have just mentioned to them that from where I stand, with the light being reflected, they both have halos. So they assured me that wasn't the light reflected. So we're going to hear from Neil first and then from Colin, and then there will be time for questions. But if you could hold your questions until after Colin has spoken, please. Now I'd like to hand over to Neil.
Thank you very much, Bridget. Good morning, everyone. Yes, Brexit. Right. I gave a speech on Wednesday night on universities where I promised 2 mentions of Brexit during the speech, stuck to it, and it was so refreshing. I'm afraid we're going a little longer on it this morning, but first let me start by thanking UKHCA for the invite and thanking Bridget and Colin for all that you do for the sector, because I think it's really important that the sector has a loud voice in a large number of major policy issues that we face, and I'll touch on a few of those this morning. The heritage of the CBI is as the umbrella body for 150 trade associations. It's our job to do the cross-economy, macro-economy piece and to raise sector issues where they're significant for us all. And Homecare is a sector, as you would expect, where the concerns are significant for all businesses in the UK. So let's turn to this week. It's the first week back at school. Not all of us are as lucky as my daughter, who get to go off to Somerset for a week residential surfing before she gets thrown into SATs in Year 6. Most of us are trying to work out what the government is up to. And there are some really big issues at play right now in the British economy. The effect of technology, the effect of demography and changing demography on our public services and on our product markets. The need to innovate in our products in a world where the globally integrated economy is getting bigger year on year, and where things can be done at low cost in China, that means things have to be done better here in the UK. Massive economic challenges. Haven't said Brexit yet. But that's the reality of where we are. We are engaged in the biggest single challenge for the British economy and political society, probably in peacetime ever, which is sucking oxygen towards it at a time when we also have a phenomenal range of other things that we have to focus on. And the challenge for the CBI is to set these two in context. So I'm going to talk this morning a little bit about Brexit. That's a lie. I'm going to talk a lot bit about Brexit and where we think it is and what it means for the sector and what maybe you should be thinking about and what we're thinking about and how we get this to safe harbour. But I'm also later on going to talk a little bit about the sector and its importance to the UK economy and what we, working with UKHCA, are trying to achieve for you. And that's important, because the end game of all this is not some political and economic realignment, it is the success of Britain socially and economically. And we should always maintain that focus. You'll rarely hear the CBI talk about Brexit without also talking about our industrial strategy, because this is about how are we as a nation competitive, and coming to the CBI's own mission statement, at the end of the day, how is our competitiveness supporting the UK as a place to invest and do business, because that is what is good for all of us as individuals and in our families. So I put it off long enough, let's talk a bit about Brexit. So we live at a time when political risk is high, uncertainty is probably higher still, and where business planning over the long term is extremely difficult. I recently had a round table with, and it was on the issue of immigration, with a number of businesses talking about their planning ahead for what is to come. And I think the thing I'd want you to leave with is one of them said to me, a big company said, I'm on the 17th version of my Brexit plan. And each one is less good for Britain than the one before. And so for government, they are trying to do 4 incredibly complex things at the same time, with the aim of making sure that that business can roll back from Plan 17 to 16 to 15 and things can be a bit better and people can have more clarity. Those 4 things, broadly, and I'll touch on them in turn, are negotiate, prepare, prove that the British government is ready for this, and possibly most significantly, decide what's next. So let's take those in turn. Negotiation. We live in a world where the Brexit timeline is short. I don't just mean the March 2019 timeline, I mean the October 2017 timeline. We have to have substantial progress in place on Ireland, on the bill, on citizens' rights, in time for us to be able to open the next phase of negotiations, whether that's October, November, December, January. It's clear that the pace so far has been too slow, and that increases the risk of no deal. If you take one of those that's of particular interest to the sector, citizens' rights, we've been very clear with government in private and in public over the last few weeks that the way to negotiate citizens' rights is to be very clear about what the British government intends. And in private and in public, politicians have been clear. They want to guarantee rights for people who are already here. So the message from us has been, well, why don't you just do that? Why don't we do it now? And the great thing about this is it will actually work for your negotiations. Because we're at a period of negotiation where the thing you need most for a successful negotiation, trust, needs to be built. Now, I come from quite a specific background these days. I started out as an industrial relations specialist. I do trade union negotiations. At this stage of a negotiation, classically what you would do is offer the other side a big unsolicited gift. And that is what we should do. And we're pushing very hard for it. But right now, government needs to deliver that substantial progress and is working hard to do it. But as we saw from the Prime Minister earlier in the week, the pace is not yet high enough. Secondly, you have to be ready for day one. Well, we saw some of that yesterday in the Houses of Parliament, the Great Repeal Bill, or the European Union Withdrawal Bill, which essentially just removes European law from European law and dumps it into British law. Clearly, there are 2 big issues there. One is timescales. If we can't get a deal, March 2019 is very close, extremely close. But secondly, the politics of Parliament have changed since the general election. You saw that in the debates yesterday. So there's your political risk high again. Thirdly, getting beyond this October, November, what is the immigration settlement that we want long term? What is the trading deal that we want long term? Getting onto that discussion quickly and being clear that our economy needs an open approach to labour coming from elsewhere in Europe. Earlier this week you saw a leak of a document from the Home Office which, to those of you who are close to the debate, is pretty obviously an early draft of the immigration white paper that we expect this month or next. Colin will say a little more about this in a moment. I'd encourage you to look through that document and think about the fundamentals of what it is saying. Essentially, it says, in some form, we'll guarantee rights for those who are already here. It doesn't go far enough to do that now. It then says there will be a transition period. It doesn't go far enough to make clear that that transition period will be as alike what we have now and close to, and as simple to what we have now and as time clear as it can be. Although in our discussions with the Home Office since then, I think we've made some progress since this draft was produced. Where it is almost completely unclear is what happens after the transition period, whether that is 2021 or 2022 or 2023. And that in and of itself is a challenge, because while the CBI is clear that the timescales to March 2019 now mean that we have to move quickly and we need a transition period. There is very little good that will come for the British economy of having a transition period that goes on forever and ever and ever, because if businesses need certainty to make investment decisions, then those investment decisions need more than a 2-year horizon. And then finally, the question of deciding what's next. In October, November, December, we'll come to the decision of whether sufficient progress has been made, and that is a simple yes/no. Immediately after that, we then have to decide, do we spend that time negotiating the best transition deal, or do we try to negotiate the trade deal there and then? These are the critical things that will take up a lot of political time. The challenge is that behind these arrowhead issues, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of business concerns. And one of the roles for us and for sector organisations like UKHCA is to raise those as swiftly as possible and to demonstrate some leadership on them, because the high politics of Brexit will occupy senior political time. And Brexit itself will suck oxygen out of some of these debates unless we are on the front foot. And that's why I think the outreach that we've seen from government since the election, something has changed, is really positive. These 4 processes that I've outlined are political. They are uncertain. You see that in the letters this week that have been doing the rounds, people trying to get businesses to sign up to backing the number 10 Brexit plan. You see that in the political debate in Parliament yesterday. So our focus at the CBI is slightly different. We need to help business cut through the politics and think about the planning that they need to do, and you do need to be planning. We need to get the economy to the top of the agenda in this debate. And we need to not be parochial. We need to reach out to the 27 other countries where, surprisingly enough, as it is for the British political debate, politics also happens. I mean, it's a truism to say the biggest issue in Brexit at the moment is the German election in a couple of weeks' time. But the political debates in the European member states are also going to heighten the political risk we face. Actually, I've heard it said that one of the reasons why the 3 issues that are up front are the bill, citizens' rights, and Ireland is because those are the things where the EU27 have closest agreement. If we can actually get those settled on through, then we have friends in Europe who are interested in a good economic deal, and we need to work with them to get that right. So the CBI's positioning has been pretty clear. In July, Carolyn Fairbairn, my boss, our Director General, gave a speech at the London School of Economics where she called for a time-limited transition deal which kept us in the single market and in a customs union. I have to be very careful. It's a customs union. It doesn't necessarily need to be the customs union. 46 days later, that was government policy, which, considering it was written off as not a runner at the time, I think is possibly the biggest sign of progress that we've seen in this whole debate, and we've enjoyed fantastic support and cooperation with all the other business organisations in driving this idea forward. It's not a CBI win, it's a win for all of us in getting the economy back into this debate. But that's because people see what the stakes are. 40% of companies are already slowing investment decisions in the United Kingdom because of the uncertainty about Brexit. What a transition, if it's done well, should mean is one transition, really, at the end of the transition period into the final deal. And that's what I encourage you to think about for the sector, especially as regards you're thinking about the people and skills that you have relied upon from around Europe. It probably means that you have the likelihood of something that looks a bit like free movement for a couple of years after 2019. Beyond that, things will change fundamentally, and in ways at which, at this time, I cannot offer you clear guidance because the politics is so confused. That's your lead time to think about the other things that you might do if things go less well. And we should remember that this is in the scenario where we reach an agreement. The timeline to March 2019, if we don't reach agreement, is remarkably short. So let me turn now, having said all of that, to the sector itself. Now, you know as well as I do that the triumph of the 20th century is rising life expectancy. And you also know that 80% of people, sorry, missed my cue. And you also know that 1 in 3 older people have issues that lead to them needing care in the home. And Colin, you and the sector have been very clear with me, both in my CBI role and in my role on the Law Pay Commission, of the challenges of providing that, especially in an environment where 90% of those people want to be cared for in the home. Getting policy right for the home care sector really matters. It matters for people, both in terms of mental and physical health. And not just those in care. I had an example of this in my own family just last week, that the impact of people who require care on those who are around them is just as significant. And the downstream benefits of supporting your sector to the UK economy and to people and to UK families are enormous. The Age UK study that says that it would cost £5.3 billion to replace what the sector does is very clear. But there's also a massive economic benefit. We talk about productivity all the time in the UK economic debate at the moment. It's a bit of a kind of economic death word because people think, oh, here we go. But productivity is really about people giving their best at work, having the skills and being engaged. You can't give your best at work if you're worried about your mum. So getting that right is really important. And finally, for the state, we talk a lot about austerity, we talk a lot about cuts, but the impact of demography on state spending is enormous. If we don't get the social care, and in particular the home care framework right, you risk people falling back on hospital care, on NHS care that costs 8 times what care in the home does. So an agenda for care, broadly, as part of our industrial strategy, coming back to where I started, is actually critical to all those really big long-term challenges I mentioned earlier. For Brexit, what we need to do is Brexit-proof that strategy. What does that mean? Well, firstly, getting the access to skills right. You can rely on us to be pushing for a system beyond the transition period that enables people to have access to the skills they need based on economic justification, not on some test drawn up by civil servants into Marsham Street at the Home Office, which decides which sector gets to have people, which defines skills in the way civil servants define skills, which, by the way, is a degree, usually from a Russell Group university, most often only 2 of the Russell Group. There is a very different debate that we need to have about economic need here in the UK. We're trying hard at the moment to get government to think about the contribution that workers make when they come here. To get back to the idea that this is not about people just being allowed to come to the UK, it's about people coming here and contributing, and where we can evidence that, there should be no case for saying just because someone works in a role where the qualifications are vocational or where the pay is a little lower, that they shouldn't be allowed in where someone who works in a sector where the pay is a little higher and people tend to have honours degrees from red brick universities should. That is really important, and it's really important to all of you and our whole economy for the reasons I set out earlier. But it's not enough on its own, because Brexit didn't happen because of free movement. But we won't get the immigration system we want if we're not also offering good opportunities to progress for kids in Oldham, or any town you choose to mention. I grew up in Cumbernauld in central Scotland. Pick that one. as another example. There has to be a strategy in all our sectors for how we attract, retain, develop British staff. It's enlightened self-interest because we don't know which way these talks will go. But it will also build the confidence of government to give us what we really need, which is an open approach to migration. Second part of our industrial strategy for the sector has to be about the Sisyphean task of integration of health and social care. And it's very easy for politicians to be glib about that as an aim. But it's a burning platform. I was at CBI Scotland Council on Tuesday, I mentioned earlier, and that burning platform is becoming clear to politicians. One member of the CBI who was there referred to Brexit as a forcing mechanism. It's made things that were always issues more important to politicians than before. It amplifies challenges we knew we had. Vocational skills is an example of that. So let's be clear that the fiscal position, the funding position, Brexit creates a burning platform to make real progress working with the sector on what we do to support you to ultimately save the taxpayer money by reducing the impact on the NHS. Finally, and perhaps a little more pointy-headedly, this question of innovation and the diffusion of innovation and how we collaborate in sectors to improve performance. I'm very taken with the kind of work that is going on in many places around the country. If you take the University of Southampton's work with Inquiring Minds on Care Share, which is integrating the planning of care and the scheduling of care between professional care workers and unpaid family members and others. These are fantastic ideas that can simplify and improve productivity in the sector. We're doing some work for our own annual conference in November on how we improve the support for all sectors on the diffusion of innovation across the technology, which is vitally important, but actually the people skills that are necessary to make that work, and of course how we learn from the best globally. And there are some fantastic examples in the sector of people taking ideas from around the country and around the world to improve our care. But let me finish by saying what I think the CBI's role in all this is. If nothing else, we need to be the stewards of the British economy in the interests of not just our members but the British people. We need to support individual sectors on their critical concerns. We've talked a lot about mobility here today and will, I'm sure, in the questions. We need to be your champions, the champions of the business community broadly. We've just launched a new report, a new campaign called Everyone's Business, which is setting out what business does and trying to help us collectively as a business community explain what we do better. You as a sector have a fantastic story to tell about the lives you improve every day. And we also have a role to play to increase the awareness of issues where they are impacting people across our economy. And I'm very aware from my role on the on the government comes and gives me an ear bashing about national living wage every year, the impact that the conduct of commissioning is having on the sector. Sustainability on funding is for care is a big long-term economic challenge for the whole of our economy, and the CBI should lean in on it. The thing that holds all this together is industrial strategy. So we need big long-term collaborative plans in every sector, working with us, working with government, really making the case that the real answer to getting through Brexit is dealing with the other three things I mentioned at the start of this speech. Using Brexit, whatever happens in the politics, using Brexit as a forcing mechanism to really change and improve what we do together. We are keen to support the sector in any way we can. I'm looking forward to having a discussion after Colin's said a few words with you about all of these issues. But for now, let me say the CBI as an organisation is about every sector. But because it's about every sector, it's about understanding why those sectors matter. And your voice is a powerful one with us, and because with us, with our links into government. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Neil. And now, Colin.
Neil, thank you very much for a really comprehensive update with insights from across the business sectors with government. And Brexit is such a big issue that for the whole UK that it really does need the strength of combined voices. So we are absolutely committed as UKHCA to working with CBI and also with our colleagues through the Cavendish Coalition specialising in social care and health Brexit policy. And it's really important that we do get UKHCA members' views into the wider picture for the business economy. And particularly grateful, Neil, to CBI's recognition of the contribution that home care services make to the economy at large, but to the workforce, not just the ones we employ, but the people who we support who are in work and combining their work with caring responsibilities. It does rather feel like government is going to be dominated by Brexit issues over the next 2+ years, probably a lot longer, and it does feel like very little else is going to get through, both because of the capacity within the civil service and available parliamentary time over the next 2 years. This could be a blessing for social care, despite John's criticisms of the Care Act 2014, which I share a few of them. It does actually mean a period of perhaps a little bit more stability on everything else. But of course, social care at the moment feels like too hot an issue for a Conservative government to get a consensus, even within its own ranks, to produce the Green Paper. So it could be a mixed blessing. Neil talked about the Home Office paper leaked earlier this week on Wednesday morning. Certainly brightened up my morning as I walked out of an 8:30 meeting with Michelle, my press officer, saying, "Colin, I've got Channel 4 News wanting comment on this straight away," while I was trying to do the London Evening Standard, who'd emailed me just at the same time. Now, really important to think about this document. Neil has said, go through and have a look at exactly what it is. It is available on the Guardian website in total. But it is a leaked document. Government are saying that it's been refined at least 6 times since the version that is in the public domain. It hasn't gone to ministers. So it's not official policy, but it is probably the best indication we have so far of where things are going. So my reading of this, workers already resident in the UK at the point of exit from the European Union seem to be okay. After a 2 or 3 year transition period, new workers entering the UK from the European Union would need to have applied for a residence permit within something like 3 to 6 months of getting here. There's a degree of uncertainty because this isn't government policy. And then the maximum length of stay for somebody who is from the EU working in the UK, around 2 years, possibly longer for higher skilled workers. And I really object to home care workers being referred to in government documents as and other workers as low-skilled workers. I have a real problem with that. But that leaked paper, I think, is a really good wake-up call about Brexit planning. Now, Neil talked about a large organisation on version 17 of its Brexit plan. Well, we need to be sure that within our own organisations we have at least versions 1, 2 and 3 of our Brexit plan. And if you aren't at number 3 yet, time to get your skates on. I have just tweeted some thoughts for what might go into a Brexit plan. So if you want to go and find that on social media with the UKHCA17 hashtag. So employers need to prepare for a worst-case scenario. We know nationally 7% of the workforce are non-British EEA nationals, but the impact of losing that workforce in the future, not getting a proportion of the working population coming into the UK, would hit hardest in London, the south of England, and in dense urban areas across the country. That's what we know from the data from Skills for Care, where the home care workforce from the European Union is particularly concentrated, and London, the percentage is really high. And of course there are particular types of service. Live-in care springs to mind particularly, where there is often in many organisations an even higher proportion of EU nationals working in the sector. So, quick summary of the thoughts that I've tweeted for what needs to go into providers' contingency plans. We need to make sure that we continue to value our existing workforce, including those workers who are from the European Union, and particularly those who may be feeling that the UK is not a particularly friendly place to be. And I should imagine it's felt a little bit less unfriendly since Wednesday morning. But long term, we need to think about being attractive to the domestic workforce. In the worst case scenario, it is UK workers who are going to be your workforce in the future. That means getting terms and conditions of employment right, and that's not just about getting pay levels right, they are extremely important, but it's the other terms and conditions of employment so that home care as a career choice is a really attractive option in a very competitive labour market. It means using effective recruitment sources. UKHCA is very grateful for the employers who've contributed to a recent survey that we're currently analysing to say where is working for getting recruits. You've got Neil Eastwood talking about effective recruitment strategies later on in the programme. And getting more efficient recruitment procedures so that when you do get somebody knocking on the door saying, I'd like to be a home care worker, please, they are in your organisation, getting trained and ready to work as soon as possible, rather than saying, oh, you've kept me too long and I've now got a job in the supermarket. And then apprenticeships. Making the most of the apprenticeship system, really important. There's been a mixed reception to apprenticeships within the home care sector, I think it's fair to say, but not everybody, and we know this from the survey I mentioned earlier, is saying that you can't use apprenticeships for frontline home care workers. So there is not necessarily that it doesn't work in the home care sector. Where I think the biggest area of concern is the out-of-workplace commitment within apprenticeships, and that's one that I think is going to be a real sticking point for the adoption of apprenticeships in frontline workers. But we need to make sure that the apprenticeship levy doesn't feel like just an additional cost burden, that it actually is going to be able to contribute to workers' training. And then just finally to think about what UKHCA would like to see on Brexit from the home care sector, and you're not going to hear a difference, particularly with what Neil said, so I'm going to be echoing a number of his points. We need as much notice as possible on future migration policy, not just leaked documents that come our way. We do need adequate transition arrangements to avoid the cliff edge that many people fear in the labour market. We need action on the long-term funding of care, because that's what determines the pay terms and conditions of the majority of our workforce, as most of it is purchased still by the state. And without freedom of movement, we need access to those non-graduate workers where there's an insufficient domestic workforce. The criteria needs to be based on the value of care workers to the UK economy, not, as Neil said, those sort of rather arbitrary criteria which are largely qualifications and salary. And then visa processors, once we're outside freedom of movement period need to be workable both for employees and employers. So it has to be a system that can be usable to maintain the capacity of the sector. And one final idea, and if government are listening, I'd be really grateful. In the past, the Department of Health sponsored a national advertising campaign for social care recruitment. At the point of Brexit, those all got scrapped, but I think there really is a case, and UKHCA will be making it repeatedly with government. I know Bridget's already started with that, of saying, actually, we need to start now to make sure that social care is being seen as an attractive career option for the workforce. I'm going to stop here, and we'd be delighted to take some questions from you.
So thank you very much, Neil and Colin. We are slightly behind schedule, so if you could keep questions brief, please. And we have one over there.
Thank you. Is this coming up? Yeah. Hi, I'm Mike from Trinity Homecare. Colin alluded to some of the regional differences when it comes to the workforce and some of the challenges across different parts of the service, like live-in care, which is one of the services we provide. What we're seeing is there's already an impact of Brexit because the pound's devalued, less people are coming, and people are saying they're feeling less welcome. So I think my question is, what is the CBI doing, or what can we do to impact things today? Because we talk about transitional arrangements, but there's already an impact. And that might not yet be felt in the official figures, but we're feeling it on the ground.
Well, thanks very much. I think it actually is. Can you hear me okay? So I talked about innovation and learning to use that's why you need skills to use technology effectively. Look, it already is in the official figures. You look at the August numbers. The fall in net migration was driven by EU citizens leaving the United Kingdom. And we were very bold around that stacked up the anecdote that we've heard from businesses in every sector. Two things, I think. One is, don't discount the impact that you can have in your own businesses in counteracting that sense of people not feeling welcome. Yeah. Lean into your employee relations. Secondly, it's why I went so long on make the guarantee now, because that's the only real way of ending the kind of sense of uncertainty that these families feel. The thing is the currency, and the currency is what the currency is, and the pound has fallen. That's the bit of it that unfortunately we used to enjoy a benefit from the pound being being relatively strong next to currencies like the zloty. These are clever people. They can see the advantages of coming to the UK when the pound is strong, and it's less attractive when the pound is weak. I fear that's the bit that we don't have much control over.
Thank you. Colin, do you want to say anything?
Just it's that thing in my tips on the slide that I've tweeted. It's the thing about the terms and conditions of the workforce. It's making sure that they are adequate. And actually, I was talking to some commissioners at the meeting, so they won't mind me alluding to this, about that thing about not tendering for business which is unsustainable, fighting against those rates rather than giving in, and actually making mature business decisions about where you are going to supply to if the rates that you receive, say, from the statutory sector, are inadequate.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we express our gratitude?